All right, good morning, everybody. A couple weeks ago, I did the front brakes on my daughter's Honda Pilot. She just got her driver's license. But looking at these rear wheels, they are in pretty bad shape. So we're gonna bang those out today. I've already got the car lifted up, and I'm gonna do the rotors too. They're pretty groovy, and we'll take care of those. So let's get started. Okay, I do typically like to do this with an ice cold beer, but since it's only 9:30 in the morning, I thought that might not be appropriate. So let's get started. I've got a cup of coffee instead. We got a 19 millimeter socket on my impact, and we'll be taking off the lugs on both sides of the car first. All right, so although the rotor looks smooth, it's got a really deep groove here. So this is a good time to change these rotors. Well, probably should have been done a while ago. And then brake pads are pretty much worn all the way down too. So now we are going to remove the brake pads by opening up the caliper, and then we will remove it. All right, so all of the hardware, sliders, mounting bolts for the calipers, I'm gonna spray everything real good with some PV Blaster penetrating oil to loosen things up. All right, as you can see, I have sprayed some PV Blaster on the nuts, or the screws, the slider bolts, and behind them, the mounting hardware for the caliper. That is all lubed up as well. You're gonna need a 12 millimeter. I've got sockets as well as wrenches to get these sliders out, and then the bolts for the caliper themselves holding that to the wheel. That's a 14 millimeter. So again, I've got the sockets as well as open end box wrenches to help me get these off. All right, so I've removed the bottom bolt from the slider. And now I can swing up this portion of the caliper, and the piston is free, and you can see where my brake pads are. So I'm going to take the brake pads out. Then I will remove the upper bolt here, again using a 12 millimeter. And then I have a little hanger that I use to hang up this portion of the brake caliper, and I'm going to hook it up to one of these springs, and that'll get it out of the way, and then I can remove the rest of the caliper and start working on getting that rotor off. So I'll show you that once I get this those brake pads separated. Okay, so as you can see, I have now removed the brake pads, and I've gotten the caliper suspended by a hanger so that there's not too much tension on that brake line. So now we can go ahead, remove the rest of this caliper assembly so that we can remove that rotor. And again, I am using a 14 box wrench to get these bolts off, 14 millimeter. All right, so I've got the two 14 millimeter bolts removed. They were a little tight. Those were have been in there a while, so I did have to hit the hammer, hit the crescent wrench with the hammer a little bit to get those out. Here are the two, I'll just call them the slider bolts. And now I'm going to work on removing this rotor. There are two screws, one here and one here. I've got to remove those. And then there is a little bit of rust built up around here, but a few taps with the hammer and I should be able to remove this rotor. These screws are a little tight, so I'm going to try using impact to loosen them up. Oh, that was nice. Perfect. Taking the sliders out, a little bit of rust. I'm gonna scrape that off. going to re-grease. They're sliding pretty nice, but I am going to re-grease them with some brake and caliper grease. Okay, comparing the new and the old rotor, everything is a match, so we will go ahead and mount it. I like to put a little lithium grease on there, just in case I need to take this thing apart again in the future. All right, I've got the new rotors on. I did put these 2 screws back in and set them hand tight and gave them a good wreck, but that's all I'm gonna do for now. All right, I'm mounting the caliper bracket back on, and I am going to torque. I did put a little anti-seize on the caliper mounting bolts. I'm going to torque those to 80 foot-pounds, no thread lock. I don't like using thread lock on these. I'm just going to do the torque spec some people do. And I am going to torque the guide pin bolts to 27 foot-pounds. So I am just reversing the process and putting the hardware back on before we mount the new brake pads. All right, for brake pads, I'm using a ceramic disc brake pad hardware kit matched to the 2007 Honda Pilot. First thing I'm going to do is make sure that the clips for the guide clips for the brake pads are matched to the old one. Obviously, that's the old one. They do look like a good match, and I have already matched the brake pads to make sure I've got the right parts. Okay, once you've placed your guide clips in, next we are going to apply a little brake and caliper grease to the groove so that that brake pad can move, and then we'll work on mounting the piston back on. It may take some jiggling around and grease on those tabs, but this is what it's going to look like once you get your new brake pads installed. Now, use a C-clamp to push in the piston because you're going to have to get it over that new, much wider set of brake pads. Here's a quick shot. It ain't pretty, but you can see I've got my C-clamp on, and I'm just slowly twisting to push this piston back into that caliper housing. So once I get it pushed in all the way, I'll be able to put it back on over the new width of that brake set. Okay, so not everybody does this, but since every time I change brakes, I see a lot of rust and corrosion on these little thin plates on both sides. So I like to grease them up pretty good. I even put a ring of grease. This is brake and caliper grease on the piston ring itself. Again, I usually see a lot of rust on the back side of that brake pad. So both sides of the brake pad I have greased with brake and caliper grease, and I put a little bit on that piston. Okay, I have the caliper guide pins put back in. I'm going to screw these on by hand. Then I will use a 12 millimeter socket, and I'm going to torque those to 27 foot-pounds. Once I do that, this wheel is complete. We can do the exact same process on the other side. All right, with the wheels back on, the last thing we're going to do is torque each lug nut to 80 foot-pounds. After that, put our tools away and this project's done. Project is not done yet. What we need to do is take a spin around town and hit the brakes 30 times, spaced apart by about 30 seconds, where we go from 45 miles an hour down to 5. We want to heat up the brakes and get those pads and rotors matched nicely. After that, then we're done.